Professor Marianne Cummings.
Well, it's interesting that you should bring up Barack Obama because I'm composing a letter to the editor that I may or may not send, but
maybe you should run it by Roberta Kaplan from Time's Up. She's good at vetting people's articles and letters.
Well, basically, not only has Obama been just distinguished by like absolutely no substantive activity for public good, like a Jimmy Carter. I mean, we still have this awful, just grotesque museum that they're planning to build in Chicago. And that's in Jackson Park. And that's that was in an area that was dedicated to open spaces. And being a park district commissioner, I'm dedicated to open spaces, to preserving public land, to improve the environment and the health of the environment and people. So he's got this thing that is going to wreak havoc on that area. It's going to be closed off to the public. And I just found out that he's got another monstrosity going on in Hawaii, now I worked for the University of Hawaii for 6 years. At Fermilab, they sent me my checks. I got twice to visit the place. And the neat thing about Hawaii was that there are no private beaches. I mean, the beaches are all public. So where I was staying, there were many resorts, but all the resorts had to have big access areas for the public to go between the resorts so they can access the beach. Well, there has been carve-outs and loopholes like that have been exploited in the last few years, and they're developing a seawall for the Obamas for their beach compound in Hawaii, which is also another environmental disaster. I mean, the ego and the, just lack of empathy of the man, that kind of like gives credence to article I read earlier this year that it seems like the more wealth you have, the less empathetic you become, not only to your fellow humans, but to everything, nature, the environment, and I had to say, what you were saying right before I came on about Obama looking cool, he did. The money started leaving Hillary and going toward Obama when it became clear to some people that, hey, what the next president needs to do for us needs to be just done by somebody a lot more attractive than Hillary Clinton. And I'm not just talking physically, I mean the whole package. He's got to be charming and charismatic and representing and transformative change and all that. And ironically, he just locked in the people in power that were vulnerable to the 2008 crash. They could have been toppled if we had a proper FDR president, but we did not. We had Obama.
There is some kind of birthright that he feels. He is better than everybody. He just is. He's just. That's the NSA calling.
That's.
He really is. Obama really is brilliant. And is playing three-dimensional chess. Unfortunately, he knows he's better than everybody and divides the world accordingly. It's obscene. I don't know.
So, we have...
Why would he do that? What was the purpose of that party? What was that? Why would you do that? If you had a $12 million estate on Martha's Vineyard, the first thing you would do is not tell anybody.
Yeah, you'd be kind
right?
of
that's the first thing.
If you were a decent human being, you'd kind of be ashamed of doing something like that.
But the whole point of having your estate on Martha's Vineyard is to just, hang out with Larry David and all the people who live on Martha's Vineyard and keep it, Carly Simon and just keep it DL. Have the party in Chicago. Then you go, yeah, he's he's spreading the money around. Why would
Well,
you
we've
do?
already been trying to argue with Obama through the Democratic Party that he should have had the monument to his great self, in Humboldt Park or on the west side of Chicago, some of these places that are economically blighted, so that could use an infusion of, economic activity. But no, he had to grab the public land in a very nice section of Chicago.
So is that like a eminent domain type of thing?
I don't even know what justification they used. I tried to find out, and they were saying something about, well, it'll be in the public interest, like presidential libraries are. It's not even a presidential library. That's going to be somewhere down the road. It just is, from all appearances, just appears to be a monument to himself. And it doesn't appear it's going to have unfettered public access, to the waterfront and to the, traditional parks, to the Jackson Park area. And many old trees are going to have to be felled. It's going to be a disaster. So we're still trying to stop it. And so I'm trying to get together various park district commissioners and, set this letter around to try to word it in a way that doesn't cause certain of our allies some consternation. But nonetheless, somebody's got to say something at this point. I mean, it's just, he's like a child. He's like a spoiled child that's been allowed to run amok. Because
they don't leave, the Democrats. Hillary and Bill, they should have gone back to Arkansas and made sure Arkansas remained a blue state. Al Gore, I guess Al Gore went back to Tennessee, but he couldn't get, those people saw through him. Obama, where's he from? Chicago, New York, everywhere. Hawaii.
Hawaii. He was in he was in New York for a while, and then he moved to Chicago after he graduated from Harvard.
Well, while I have you here, Monday, the United Nations panel on climate change issued the most definitive report on the trajectory of the cataclysmic events befalling us because of man-made climate change. They aggregated, assimilated, put together 14,000 studies and delivered the clearest summary that involves physical science and climate change. This is the most authoritative study of climate change, and they concluded that it is unequivocally true that climate change is caused by human beings. They say that our ability to study the climate is way more precise, and that the next 30 years, no matter what we do, is going to get worse. And
I think we can't call it climate change anymore. We have to change the tense. It's changed. The climate has changed. And now we're just watching the slow motion train wreck.
They offer up 5 different futures for the planet. But in the end, there still is a window that we can still take the climate back from the abyss. But we only have about, 20 years?
Oh, we have to be acting now, as in several years ago. But unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be a capability of leadership in Washington. It's not just lack of leadership now. It's just like I'm looking at some of these people. They have to be smart enough to know what's going on. And they have done everything possible. And I'm talking about the Democrats who supposedly are worried about this kind of stuff. They've done everything possible to make sure that they are not able to change a damn thing. I mean, I still haven't gotten a reasonable explanation of what is their thinking behind having a bipartisan bill for infrastructure, which includes nothing, by the way, except for a possible for climate, except for a possible $25 billion subsidy to fossil fuels. And this 3.5 trillion, which seems to at least start us on the right path. Why are they bothering with the bipartisan bill?
Because
I don't know.
Because we've talked about this.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing in it that's bad. It's just not enough.
Oh, there's plenty in it that's bad. In the
What's
bipartisan
bad
bill, the massive privatization of public assets in the infrastructure bill we're talking about. And these public-private partnerships are just largely a disaster. It's just a way to give away to private industry and, well, private finance now, public assets. I think we are just grinding our time away. I think what's destructive about it, apart from that, and the proposed rather regressive tax structure that would pay for some of this, is that it's grinding up time. It's just grinding up. What has gotten done in the last month? And now they're off on vacation. And what will get done in the, 5 weeks that they're going to have in the fall to do anything at all? They needed to push the Bernie Sanders bill out the door like yesterday. And sit down with Sinema. Yeah. What's that?
Let me play you something Bernie said. I think Congress is on vacation. I think the Senate. Well, this is what Bernie said today.
Well, Senator McConnell, things are changing. For once in a very long time, the United States Congress is going to stand with working families and not just the rich and the powerful. Further, above and beyond the economic crises facing working families, Congress has ignored the great existential threat of our time, and that is
Sheriff Chitwood, then focusing attention to this website.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, that was Chairman of the Budget Committee, Senator Bernie Sanders, talking about his $3.5 trillion infrastructure bill. And by the way, the existential threat is climate change. I cut that off. Okay. It felt good to hear him, didn't it? Doesn't that make you? That was him today.
Yeah. I have said that I still hold out some hope that Bernie can actually surprise us, that this won't get muddled down by a couple of recalcitrant Democratic senators who, need to be just arm wrestled into place. I mean, if they can't pass this, I don't know what happens. But it's frustrating because we're being told, we're giving no reasonable explanations for why there should be two bills. And, it only appears to be grinding up time. So since I have no other information and I can only go by what I actually see is happening, it just leaves us in a bad spot. Of course, we support the $3.5 trillion bill. It should have been $6 trillion, Bernie said was the bare minimum that we needed to do. But okay, maybe some more can come later. But,
is it conceivable? I'm not an economist. We don't have any economists here because it's not a science. But it is conceivable. It is conceivable that the economy, not the economy for the 99%, but just the numbers are off the charts. That the economy is coming on really strong, profiting the richest 1%, and that if they pump too much into it, there might be, Weimar Republic inflation.
Well, economists that I respect and are smart, like Stephanie Kelton, thinks that's just nonsense. I mean, and she's got some very well thought out arguments about modern monetary theory and the deficit myth book that she came out, I think late last year. I have it. I have about halfway through it. It makes things. She's a very good writer, But you do have to reread the first two chapters a couple of times to make sure that, is it that simple? Have I been so wrong about economics? Yes, like a lot of us still look at a budget.
Well,
and the
everybody is
household
wrong.
budget.
Here's the thing about it. I want to bring in, if you don't mind, let's bring in Professor
Please.
Ann Lee and Jonathan Bick. The thing about economics is it's scientists. They call themselves scientists, but they're paid to come up with conclusions. They are theories. Economics is an ideology in search of facts. So you can still have Stephen Moore and Arthur Laffer promoting supply side economics. Nobody knows anything. It's what they say happened, and it's revisionist history. They can, Amity Shales now is rewriting history and claiming that Herbert Hoover saved America during the Depression, and it was FDR who almost bankrupted us. I mean, you can interpret it any way you want. Heather Long has a list of the items driving up inflation. Car rentals are up nearly 90%. If you want to rent a car, it's 90%. Used cars are up 45% in the past year. Gas is up 45%. If you want to buy a laundry machine, a washer dryer, it's up 30%. Airfare is up 25%. Hotels are up 17%. Furniture is up 8%. Bacon is up 9%. TVs, 8%. Fruit is up 8%. And it goes on and on. New cars are up 5.3%. The thing is about inflation is it's what you choose to measure. If you're trying to rent a car and you see that it's up 87%, you say, wow, we have inflation. If you're paying your own medical bills, we have inflation. If you're paying for your college education, we have inflation. If you're buying milk or fresh fish or fruit or a TV or clothing, we don't have inflation. It just depends on what you're worried about, which speaks volumes to Stephanie Kelton's modern monetary
and also, what your real ability to produce. I mean, we have a problem with COVID because workers aren't like cyborgs that you can put in cold storage for 15 months and take out. I mean, half of my friends here were in service industry. They had to make major adjustments to their lives. Like, some of them had to leave their apartments, move in with their family members. They're doing something else. So their availability to just come online to work in restaurants or to work in retail or to do any number of service type jobs, or even a lot of the businesses had to close. So we just have this, it's not deeply structural. It was just an artifact of the fact we had a pandemic, but there is an enormous amount of latent productivity. We just had millions and millions of people that could be put to use with the right incentives. Hey, how about offering jobs that pay people a living wage? That's what we lack. We don't lack workers. So, and getting back to the economy, I just wanted to say that, yes, the economy is not, economics is not a science. It really should be more considered a branch of ethics. But I think the way it's been practiced is just hideous accounting procedures because, they don't take climate change into account, the exogenous factors. They don't take the real costs into account of what these companies have been doing, have never had to pay the real costs of their business, and they're getting wealthy. And that's a problem that we somehow made a religion out of marketplace, not realizing that we create the marketplace. The government creates the conditions in which a market can even function.
Yeah, we were talking earlier about radio. There is no marketplace with radio. It's controlled by 4 companies, and they rather lose money than open it up to new voices. Professor Anthony,
okay.
Your thoughts, Professor John?
Well, that's true that you have, essentially market concentration for radio or whatever, but so the regional effects of these things are what counts. But yeah, it may not be a science. It's a little bit more of a dark art. Let's put it that way.
A dark art in that you bring in Stephen Moore or whomever to say what you want him to say.
Well, I mean, that's the spin side of it. I mean, if you have, they still consult Larry Kudlow. He has a soapbox over at Fox, or Fox Business, whatever, and he still says the same nonsense he said all through the Trump administration.
How is it possible these people are never held accountable by our media? I know the answer to this. It is so simple, Professor John, to say to Larry Kudlow, okay, you're an economist. You predicted 3% growth. We had 1% growth. Or James Cramer, you said to buy stock in WorldCom, it went out of business. To just spend some time and have them answer for their predictions.
Yeah, I they don't want to do that because
unfair. They say it's unfair to do that to them.
Oh, unfair to hold them accountable for their predictions. Yeah, maybe they shouldn't have them make predictions in the first place. And what they should do is say, look, or have people on with opposing viewpoints, but say, look, you said, if we give money to people as opposed to banks and corporations, you said there was going to be inflation. Well, where is it? And you mentioned that prices of some things are going up. And I think we had addressed this earlier, which was you have to look at what we're measuring against, right? So a year ago, we're sort of looking at the downside of the economy because of COVID, and it depends what your base is, what you're measuring against to say, oh, there's been an increase in these prices, and also that COVID impacted the supply chains,
right?
And businesses like rental cars, they sold off their entire fleet of most of their fleet of rental cars. Saying, oh, well, maybe business will never come back, which is kind of absurd. So now they're scrambling to buy cars. And then we also had the problem of the computer chips. So the manufacturers of cars have been having trouble keeping pace with production. I think what you're going to find is in the next 6 months to a year, you're going to find people rejecting these higher prices. If companies are trying to get them into the, trying to raise prices, I think you'll find consumers will reject them. One, because they just don't have the money in many cases. And two, because they don't want to pay almost as much for a used car as they're paying for a new car.
It's, yeah.
I hope that lasts, though, for another week. I got to sell my old Subaru. Runs great. It's got stick shift. Can't get stick shifts anymore in new cars.
Now with the return to in-person classes, I actually have to commute, and I am in the market for a car. So this is the worst time to be buying because there really is no discount that you would expect for used cars simply because there's so few new cars.
And what about public transportation?
Unfortunately, in my small city, the bus line doesn't run outside the kind of strict city limits. And I've moved to the kind of country, and there's no way to get in. There's no bus. It's really awful. They really need to extend the bus, the bus lines.
John Kerry is flying commercial. His family's jet only took 16 flights this year. And we're not
Wait a
absolutely
minute.
sure.
I saw a picture.
We're not sure if that's true or not.
I saw a picture of him getting out of a private jet for a
We're not sure. It was I was trying to get to the bottom of it. Professor Lee, what do you think? It was a tight shot. It looked like it could have been a puddle jumper.
Well, they don't have that many airports in Brittany where he has a home. So I don't know. It had to be a smaller jet.
The climate czar.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
It's a smaller footprint for a Gulfstream, G700.
something like if you fly on a private jet and it's packed, so all the seats are filled, each seat on a private jet consumes upwards of 40 times more greenhouse gases than a seat on a commercial jet plane. I mean, these and more, this is like a $150 billion industry, these private jets, and more people are using them. And as Professor Ian Faluna has pointed out, the aviation industry, in terms of greenhouse gases, if they were a nation, they would be the 7th largest expeller of greenhouse gases. We have to do something about.
David, you have to take a more neoliberal approach to this. Imagine all those electric airplanes that we're going to get that'll reduce that degree of pollution. All the air taxis that will become available, that will get you to your place in the metro, your job in the metroplex, 20 minutes faster. I mean, you've got to have a little faith in the economy. I'm trying to do a Kudlow thing, the market for air taxis alone, just imagine all the savings.
Yeah, it's pretty soon it could look like, Blade Runner out there or something.
Absolutely.
Professor Lee, if you're going to do Larry Kudlow, you got to be drunk. I mean,
or high.
Yeah.
His
Take a
thing
little
was
bump of
cocaine.
cocaine first.
Yeah, absolutely. Where's that 8-ball?
I mean, it's too easy to pick on Mike Lindell, but I didn't know that he was a crack addict. And these people, it really is like Hitler's bunker. These people who Trump surrounds, they have to have a character defect in order to get close to him. Otherwise, he's threatened. How terrorized are you of the right wing in America? Are we taking our eye off the ball when you read about what Trump did with the Justice Department, trying to get this guy to go in there and get Rosen to say, yes, this is unquestionably a stolen election, and then I'll take it from here. How dangerous is this?
Given that the planet is burning?
Yeah.
Not very. I mean, what are we doing? I mean, the planet, we are not mobilizing, and we have to be mobilizing. And the Democrats control the House, White House, and the Senate. And we are utterly unable to get anything done. There is no ability to lead, except possibly maybe Bernie Sanders might pull it out at the end of the day. But that's to me more terrifying. The Republicans have always been just a collection of creatures, but the Democrats were supposed to be the people that would, have some sort of ethical approach to governance and maybe care at all. Does Obama look like he cares about global warming?
Right.
I mean,
it is odd that he keeps buying these beachfront properties and he doesn't seem to care about global warming and sea level rise.
Yeah. What is on everybody's mind? I'll open this up. In my email to everybody, what is making I said, whatever's making you explode. What is Professor Lee? What is making you angry tonight?
Well, actually, I'm not quite so angry as I am pleased that Trump went off the rails, blaming the loss of the women's soccer team, the U.S. women's soccer team, because they kneeled during the national anthem. I mean, he's really trying to define, or at least suggest, that there's this thing called wokeism. And now he's trying to differentiate it in terms of not so much an ideology, but that the practitioners of wokeism are wokesters, whatever that means. He's really, and the reason why I think he went there, aside from the fact that he's just unhinged, is that he didn't say a damn thing about Rosen. I mean, he hasn't, attacked Rosen. He hasn't attacked Clark. There's his total radio silence on.
Clark is the guy he sent in. He was the head of the civil department in Justice, and right, Clark was the one who was doing his dirty work.
Yeah, and I think that there are receipts. They've demanded the visitor logs for the White House. They're planning on getting the actual visitor logs. You recall that they didn't allow public release of visitor logs for most of the Trump administration, but someone kept them. They had to be kept. I mean, just from a National Archives point of view. So there are receipts. In other words, how many times did Clark come to the White House? And to just go back into the Mueller period, I mean, how many times did Devin Nunes sneak into the White House? I just think that there's stuff there, and it's all gonna, bubble to the surface, even if people are going to try and shine it on for all the usual reasons. It's unfortunately very depressing in that sense, but yeah. I think we're all still in the silly season, and it's going to explode in the fall.
It's going to explode in the fall because
there's just too much stuff there. I mean, the visitor logs alone will be just bizarre. I mean, all kinds of we know from the biographies that wacky people would show up. We know that because Lindell himself did a bunch of those things. It just with crazy crap, and we know that from that one thing where Lindell was just totally apoplectic and was demanding to see Trump. It was kind of interesting. I mean, every time someone, had a fit and had to be, let in and dragged out, I think we'll have those kinds of records too. Should be pretty amusing.
And then they can just use the insanity defense.
Yeah, that may be a plus.
Yeah. I think Professor Marianne is onto something. I can't do anything about climate change, so I worry about fascism instead. I think that's
because that's easy to solve.
Yeah. Professor John, what's on your mind tonight? What are you worried about?
Well, I would agree with you that people who are downplaying the January 6th insurrection and Trump's actions at replacing people at the Pentagon and replacing people, across his administration after he lost the election in an attempt to put cronies in there that would do whatever he said. This is not something to take lightly, because he could come back conceivably in 2024.
Do you think that the Biden administration is unaware of that? I mean, Biden is the president, the commander in chief. Do you think they might have a concern if there was just a real hostile takeover of the United States? Or are they just all naive?
Well, he'll do what Clinton did when there was a hostile takeover of the United States in December of 2000.
Mhm. Because they're all,
He'll allow a coup d'état for the sake of, for the good of the country. We'll let George W. Bush be president for the good of the country. I'll step aside.
That's hard to justify if it's an actual coup, right? I mean, it, yeah, with along with an insurrection and violence and everything else, it's kind of hard to say, oh, for the good of the country, we'll just step back and let these people take over.
Right.
Yeah, one would hope, but
well, if things are as you said, and as Professor Ann has said, well, it seems the Biden administration is doing just that.
There's very little media attention to the definition of what counts as a bloodless coup. I mean, not anyone has written on. I mean, the concept of a bloodless coup was what Clark was trying to foment, and it's just by sheer, and I don't think it's heroic so much as the rule of law, that it was totally ridiculous to propose, essentially rigging electoral votes at the state level in order to, essentially overthrow the government. But very few people are talking about how many bloodless coups occur, because there really are a fair number of them.
In America.
No, I mean globally, where you see a banana republic shift its government for X number of secret reasons, whether it was the military or the judicial branch or some other, some people with guns managed to get into which is what they tried to do in Haiti.
We better back down. These people mean business. If we walk away, there'll be less blood. That's the thinking.
Well, that goes to your good of the country thing.
Right. And so the intimidation, if you intimidate the weak in the knee liberal, lefty, whatever, they'll back down. That's the thinking.
Well, that's why you shouldn't back down, right? You should not give them the clue that you're going to back down, that you're going to be weak. And if you took a stronger stance in other ways, it would, in terms of policy making, in terms of making legislation, in terms of taking executive action, that would show the Republicans that the Democrats can't be pushed around. But they're not doing that.
Right. If we take, there's this bromide that all we have to do is give the American people Medicare for all, free college tuition, and they'll turn away from fascism. I'm not so sure about that.
Well, it kind of worked once. I mean, you had a president in the 1930s with a country that was falling apart, and they actually did enormous structural type changes legislatively that helped millions of people. Such that my mother grew up.
Perón and Hitler did the same thing. I mean, you can build I'm not so sure infrastructure and giving goodies to the 99% prevents fascism. Perón, Hitler, I mean.
Well, being that all those Nazi scientists, came over to our side after World War II, you might have a point there. But, I think that people, when they lose faith in the current rule of law or any semblance of democracy, they'll go to a strong man or a woman. They'll go to somebody who just will take charge. And Bill Clinton said something years ago that people would rather go with strong and wrong rather than right and weak any day. And that's been the problem with the Democrats. we haven't had a Democrat that has really stood, except I would say Lyndon Johnson, except that, you know, his whole Great Society was wrecked by his unwise dependence on Kennedy's Harvard advisors, considering Vietnam. But, you know, a strong leader doing things that materially benefit people. Well, of course, give people some faith that their democratic institutions work. And they don't have to work perfectly, but they have to work sometime.
It's a dual benefit, right? You're giving them not only the things that they need to live decent, dignified lives, but as you're saying, Professor Marianne, you're showing them that the institutions work, that the government can actually function and do what it's supposed to do.
I mean, it was kind of great fun, but I made a big deal out of this park that finally got built. And I was not going to run unless that park started going in, because in my neighborhood, nothing happens for people in my neighborhood. It has been declining for 50 years. And, you know, seeing a few things get better suddenly kind of revives faith. But in the case of our government right now, I mean, in some ways, COVID, the climate crisis, in terms of sheer power for lefties, I mean, this is a golden opportunity because it's real. This is where leftist politics can actually help people. And it's not being embraced by the leadership of the Democratic Party. Not only is it not being embraced, it is being actively fought against. You know, I still have faith. By the way, she announced at a meeting today, she said she would have a very important announcement in September, being that the next primary in Ohio is April 22nd, I believe, 2022. We'll give her a month off or two before she's got to get going again.
Professor Harvey J. Kaye isn't here. We'll wrap this up with a question that I think Professor Kaye is better suited to answer. We have this idea that FDR in the 30s was the golden age for the left and the labor movement, and if only we could get back to the 30s. I'm not so sure the 30s were that great a time, even for the labor movement.
If we could get back to 1945 after the war and continue with Roosevelt's economic Bill of Rights.
Okay.
Then, I mean, because we were coming off of a really bad time in the 30s. And, you know, and then we had a war, which many people argued got us out of the Depression, but because wars are massive public spending projects, let's put it this way, but the most wasteful and destructive kind, sadly, but that seems to be the only thing that motivates, you know, the entire country. So yeah. I don't think it's a matter of us thinking it was a perfect time. I'm just saying that, hey, this is what, you know, lefty politics can do if you've got the right leadership.
Try to imagine D-Day with the internet. How long do you think Eisenhower would have been the commander of D-Day if there were an internet? 2 days?
Well, I think a lot more of us would be speaking German.
Can you imagine if we had an internet and reports were coming back of the carnage and how ill-prepared our troops were? Eisenhower would have been vilified. We'd have people back home saying, call it off. Why would you? The weather was horrible. Why are you subjecting our boys to save France? I mean,
wait a minute. We've been in Afghanistan for 20 years with nothing to show. I mean, you know.
Well, we don't have bunches of balloon tanks in, you know, Afghanistan.
Right.
We
All
don't
right.
have a draft.
Oh,
That's the reason why we're still in Afghanistan, why we were in Iraq. We didn't have a draft.
no conscription is the difference.
We
And
would
to
have
answer
ended
a
that-
comment in the chat, just by parenthetically, Biden isn't pulling out of Afghanistan. We're still bombing the place, and nobody's even talked about the contractors that
Oh.
are even now outnumbering, the armed troops that our tax dollars are supporting.
I smell another book of portraits from George W. Bush of the Afghani people.
He's getting
I
as
think this is
productive as
saying
John
well.
Wayne Gacy in prison. Damn.
This is great. This was great. Thank you for this, for working around my schedule tonight. I really appreciate it. Professor Adnan Hussein, Professor Ann Lee, Professor Jonathan Bick, Professor Marianne Cummings. Thank you so much.